Welcome back to Funky Politics, the hardest hitting political show on the planet. Hey, I am DC, the curator of knowledge, the king. Well, anyway, I'm the host of Funky Politics, by the way. And let me say this. Man, what a year it's been. 2020 has been a year. And not in a lot of good terms, by the way, but just a little bit about this COVID-19 piece. You know, we are not out of the woods yet, folks. As a matter of fact, quiet as it's kept, we are still within the first phase of this pandemic, and it's looking pretty bad. It's looking pretty bad. Our states around, I know in the U.S., those states in the South, Southwest, on the West Coast, and on some states on the Northeast border, the numbers are going up on a day-to-day basis. I don't know what else we can do. The officials have said shelter in place in some instances. They've said social distance and a lot. Everybody's saying social distance. Everybody's saying wash hands. Everybody's saying wear masks. You got some states. I will not mention those governors' names, by the way. The state of Florida's governor, Governor DeSantis. I will not mention his name in this show today. That he is refusing to issue a mask order for the entire state of Florida. I will not mention his name though. But did I mention his name? But anyway, what I want to do is just to start the program off. The summer is about to end. What we have now is school is about to start, not on the secondary level, but also on the collegiate level. But I want to lend a little context to it. We as parents have got to make sure that we are the first guardians of our children, right? And so whether your child is like mine, a 20 and a 19-year-old, or they're like some cousins of mine who are 10, 11, 12, and 13, we've got to get them educated. But I want to add some context to it before we bring on our guest, and a little bit from Secretary DeVos and the president talking about kids going back to school. Take a listen.
You said this week, quote, that there's nothing in the data that suggests it would not be appropriate to have kids in school. So I want to take a look at that data. The U.S. hit a record number of new cases on Friday. The number of new cases per day is higher now in 45 of the 50 states than when schools shut down in March. Hospitalizations are climbing in several states, and some ICUs are at or near capacity. So yes or no, can you assure students, teachers, parents that they will not get coronavirus because they're going back to school?
Well, the key is that kids have to get back to school, and we know there are going to be hot spots, and those need to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. But the rule should be that kids go back to school this fall. They've been missing months of learning. Many of them are going to be so far behind, it's difficult to catch up. And we know that this is a matter of their health in a multitude of factors or multitude of dimensions. We know that their emotional well-being, their mental well-being, and particularly for kids from low-income and vulnerable populations, this is devastating to be out of school and not learning for months on end.
Madam Secretary, I don't think anybody disagrees with that. I mean, I'm a parent. I want my school-age child to go back to school as much as you are saying you want for everybody. But the question is, can it happen safely? So can you, by saying what you just said, also assure parents, students, children, everybody who's there, that they're going to be able to do so safely?
Well, we know that children get the virus at a far lower rate than any other part of the population. And again, there is nothing in the data that would suggest that kids being back in school is dangerous to them. And in fact, it's more a matter of their health and well-being that they be back in school. And we've seen this in other countries in Europe and elsewhere in the world, where students have gone back to school and have done so very successfully.
On education, the Los Angeles School District is the latest and one of the largest in the country to say they're not going back to school in the fall.
Mistake.
What do you tell parents and teachers who feel that it's unsafe to go back?
I would tell parents and teachers that you should find yourself a new person, whoever's in charge of that decision, because it's a terrible decision. Because children and parents are dying from that trauma too. They're dying because they can't do what they're doing. Mothers can't go to work because all of a sudden they have to stay home and watch their child, and fathers. What's happening? You know, there's a tremendous strain on that whole side of the equation.
So it's a balancing act.
It is a balancing act, but we have to open our schools.
President.
Look, the only thing I can say, folks, is Wow. As a parent of two collegiate age students, I'm going to listen to the scientists in this one. I'm not going to listen to Secretary DeVos, and I'm certainly not going to listen to President Trump. I think they're wrong. The data speaks to it, and I think we need to protect ourselves and protect our children. So I'll tell you what. Before we get any further into why we need to do a major shift in our country, I want to make sure we bring on someone who's put the work in. Loron Orris is now based in Hong Kong. Loron was the first person on the ground for the NBA in Hong Kong. It's important that we have these strong tentacles that reach across waters, reach across seas, where we can actually have some cross-pollination, right? So we can make sure that, number one, that we're getting the best market share for our dollars in our country, but we can also go into other markets, right? Loron is the co-founder of, let me tell you something. When I bring this guy on, y'all, you're going to think, hey, Daryl, you're crazy. Asia Sports Tech. This guy's a marketing guru. He's a strategy guru. We're going to bring him on, and we're going to talk Hong Kong. We're going to talk COVID. We're going to talk a lot about where do we go next, especially in this COVID-19 piece. We'll be right back in just a moment.
Hello and welcome to R&R on Sports. We are pleased to have with us today Mike Wallace, who is the Grind City Media Senior Editor. Mike, welcome to R&R on Sports.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, man. And I hope you guys are safe and pushing through this, man. Thanks a lot. It's been far too long. I'm glad we're finally able to do this.
Absolutely. But Howard, you got to put some respect on this brother's name. Now, he used to do the Heat Index for the Miami Heat. This brother went to the championship 4 times in a row. Now, he wasn't on the court actually before the game and after the game, but he went to the championship 4 times in a row with the Miami Heat. What's up, my brother Mike?
Hey, what's going on, man?
Kadzukian. Check out all your Kadzukian favorites now. Download the Kadzukian app, available on Android and iOS.
Loron Orris, hey, man, welcome to Funky Politics. How are you, buddy?
Hey, DC. Great to be here. Great to be here.
I did not add the special emphasis on the fact that you are it's 12 hours light away from us right now, right? So
it is.
I'm not going to tell you about the sun shining out here in my fine city right now, but it's really hot though, man. It's extremely hot, man.
You know what? It's hot here too, actually. So it's our summer, obviously, and it's pretty hot and humid. But you know, it's one of the reasons why I actually moved here. It's pretty warm. It gets cold maybe into the 50s, maybe the 40s sometimes. So it's year round. It's great weather, and there's always lots you can do here.
Wow. Loron, I want to jump right into this thing because
sure.
Despite the piece about the president, about Secretary DeVos, we want to talk about a lot of positive things. I want to talk about your journey. Not only, it didn't just start with the NBA, but your journey, not only being a placemaker in sports, but also being a placemaker in sports in the Asia market, and how you have kind of come full circle, so to speak. Let's talk a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. So, essentially, I had your regular, we'll call it regular upbringing, except one small thing that happened when I was young. And at 3 months of age, my father, who had won a scholarship, took my mother and I to India. So I spent a couple of years in India as a baby and grew up with all these incredible pictures of us traveling through India, but as well back through Asia. But then, those were kind of things we'd watch on slideshows, when back in those days, or was watching them that way. And so would see those till I was maybe 7, 8 years old. And then you just go on and you have your usual upbringing. And so it wasn't until in my late 20s where I had spent some time actually helping to open Skydome in Toronto. And then I still thought, okay, now what am I going to do? Obviously, I love sports, but I haven't seen the world. And so very good friend of mine, at the time I was working with a very good friend and his family. And then another good friend of mine said, well, if you want to see the world, pick 3 places around the world. I picked the Barrier Reef, Everest Base Camp, and Safari in Kenya, and just go and travel to those. And I'd saved some money, and I got lucky in the market and just did a trip. And through that trip, through really a little bit of South Pacific, Asia, and Africa, I traveled through it and realized, I think that Asia is a pretty great place. So I went back home. I started working on the World Championships of basketball, which is in the early 90s. As the former Yugoslavia fell apart, Toronto picked up that event. So I started working a bit on that, but realized, I still want to go back to Asia. So I bought a one-way ticket to Hong Kong. And interestingly, I started out working at a place. It was also a new stadium in Hong Kong. They just opened. And the venue and the thing that I was doing a marketing program, was very similar to the Sky Dome, and was there. So I was there for the first sevens they held there. The sevens is a big sporting event, which was a precursor to putting rugby sevens into the Olympics. But worked there, opened Hong Kong's first fully dedicated sports bar, and from there met the sports community. So while I was one of the early guys out here, there were still others that had been over there, like people from ESPN, Star Sports, some companies like that, and IMG and people like that. But it was still early days. And so from that job, which I had for, maybe 6 months, built up a big fax list, with faxes back then. Yeah. But really got to know the sports community. Yeah. And then when the NBA, they had sent a guy over by the name of Tom Fox. He remains a great friend of mine to this day. And he essentially said, I've got to hire someone. So I was the first guy that he hired. And so we started out in a small office just in Central. There were three of us. Eventually, we hired another person. There were three of us, and literally to move out in the office, we all had to stand up to get by our chairs. But from that, started out, built the office over about 4 years to I'd say about 20 people. In Hong Kong, we had some. We just opened up Taiwan as well. And then from there, I actually had a really amazing offer to go and work for IMAX in the movie world. So that business was starting to grow quite quickly. I was doing distribution all around everywhere from New Zealand to South Africa, India to Japan. So I had a huge territory. I was helping to build out the distribution network. And then I became managing director of IMAX Japan. Did that for 7 years with that company. And then I actually went back to the NBA and brought out helped bring out the USA men's team in 2006 as part of the World Championships. So that was great. That was the kind of the big, the big dream team where it was LeBron. It was a whole bunch. It was like LeBron, of course, Chris Paul, Carmelo, Dwayne Wade, and that group, which was a great tour. Although that was when they went to Japan and ultimately needed to then requalify for the 2008 Olympics. So worked in that, and then did my own business for a bit. I actually taught I helped run an executive MBA program for a number of years. And then about 3 years ago, as part of that MBA program, we were doing a lot of work in technology. We did a program back to Silicon Valley with some of our executive students. And I realized, there's lots happening in tech, but there's more happening in sports tech. And so ultimately what we did was with my business partner, we said, let's start out and do work with Asia sports tech. And ultimately what we do is we do a couple of key things. First one is we work with leading sports and sports technology firms in Europe and North America. We help them with market entry, strategy, and really business development and growth strategies. And as well for other sports brands, we work on innovation and ultimately help them to do fundraising out here. So it's really two parts of business. One is a consulting arm, and then the other part is a financial advisory arm. So it's been great.
Well, you had one hell of a story. Let me jump in there. So COVID-19.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. Where do you start? COVID-19, it has had a lasting impact, not only on America, but on the world. And especially when you have leadership that says that this one particular, and we know that apparently it started in the Wuhan province, but to use it as a battering ram, I think is unfair. But what is the lasting impact on Hong Kong been? You're based in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
What has that been for you all now?
Yeah. So, I've been here 26 years, right?
Whoa.
Because I moved here in 94. And so this is literally about the fifth or sixth crisis that I've lived through. Not so much a health crisis, but we did have SARS back in 2003. And so what happened with SARS was that people quickly, it was the same type of thing where, what's causing this? Why is it happening? What have you? But one of the things that we learned then, and we've learned, it was a combination of a practice that was already happening and that we've learned now, was literally the importance of the mask, which we can talk about a lot more, and social distancing. And people really adapted to that. And so when that happened this year, and I was actually in the US, I was in Utah, I was back for a sports tech conference, I was in Utah. When I got back, I was hearing, okay, there's something going on with the virus. And there each year there are colds that may develop in this part of the world, but certainly in this case, this was definitely serious. And immediately people said, okay, what's happening? When again, a mysterious illness and people were getting quite sick and what have you. And we were quite lucky in terms of how it works. But what helped reduce the spread was literally the three things. And you actually just mentioned it. So first one was wearing a mask, right? The mask. So everybody here has a mask of some sort. Wearing a mask. So in any place you are in public, so that can be, it could be everything from elevators in your office building, taxis, subways, anywhere there's public transportation, anywhere you're in groups. So literally right from the start, we wore a mask. But a key thing to remember with all of this is that is part of the culture. So when you're sick or you feel that you are sick or you're not feeling well, people will wear a mask. Why? Because you don't want others to be sick.
That's correct.
And it's very much in the mindset. And it's not just Hong Kong. It's throughout the whole region. It's in Taiwan. It's in China, Japan, Korea, Singapore, all Thailand. All these different countries do that. So that's the default. So when it happened this time, there were a few at certain points. There were a few foreigners that were maybe not wearing it because they weren't as accustomed to it. Well, quickly they also started wearing it. So literally everybody was wearing masks. So we got lucky in the first phase, I think, because we closed our borders. We kept so it was mask wearing, emphasis on washing your hands, of course, don't touch your face.
Sure. And
then it was and social distancing. And then, of course, as it got quite serious, then people were literally, it was limited people were just staying home. They're staying home and they're staying in. But it was all about this this group effort to do it because we'd seen it work before and we had understood it. And so it really wasn't, while inconvenient, it was just understood that's what you did. And because of that, we've seen pretty good results. So we're now, just so you know, we've had our first wave, no problem. We had I think 4 deaths I think it was something like 4 or 5 deaths out of 1,000. Because again, I also think that the Hong Kong medical system, it's free healthcare. There are 2 tiers here. There's free and you can pay, but everyone has access to free. And what happened was they were just, the minute they went in, I think the treatments were quite strong. And so the death rate was very low. It was like 4 out of 1,000, something like that. We've recently we then had a second wave that came in. So what happened was, again, the borders were closed, but we had people that were returning because they allowed citizens or residents and citizens to come back. And so those at first were coming out of the US and the UK. And then now what's happened is we're getting it, from other countries. So as certain countries or people came back,
I want to stop you right there.
Sure.
And what I want to do is I want you to give us a geopolitical or a geographical picture here of Hong Kong and the relationship with China, because a lot of people, we hear about Hong Kong, but we really don't know that Hong Kong is actually a part of China now. But in my lifetime, it was not. As a matter of fact, it was a part of the British Crown. So
so that, that shifted. Yeah. So that shifted in 97, actually. Yeah. So what's interesting was, so I was here for it was known as the handover. And so it was in 97, it returned to China and it was one country, 2 systems. And so essentially continued to operate with, with its own, its own laws and its own rules and what have you. And although, when it came to national security, it was at that point, it was part of China. And so, what people may not know is that, there were military here, of course, in different parts, because again, it is part of China. And so, and that's continued, it continues. And what's been interesting is, of course, and, even the response. So for example, with the virus, when they closed Hong Kong, that was closing Hong Kong because it considered a separate entity. Hong Kong still has, for example, its own Olympic team. It's kind of a unique, actually, designation. They have its own Olympic team, its own sports league, so it's still considered separate in that sense. So, but it's continued to, it's a unique place. It's the gate. It has been for obviously a century and a half. It's been the gateway in and out of China. Right now, it is playing and will continue to play a key role from a financial perspective. This year, there's going to be, I think there'll be a lot of IPOs taking place here actually as well. So And it's always, if you look at in Asia, it's 5 hours from all the other major countries and economies. So it's right in the center and plays a very important role for the region.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the uprisings. Of course, the Black Lives Matter movement in our country and in other countries around the world has man, you talk about young people. You talk about this diversity of faces, of races. But even in Hong Kong, were you surprised at the citizens, how they were very staunch allies with the Black Lives Matter movement? Or was this an outgrowth of what they're used to anyway, because of what some would consider the heavy-handed tactics of the Chinese?
Yeah, it's, put it this way. I think that there's, the one thing that you notice is when there were two things that were happening. So number one, there were people that were protesting and saying, okay, hey, this is what we think. And there is freedom of speech, of course. But what started to shift was when you saw people that were protesting, what was happening is these were not like we're protesting and these were, how do I describe it? Were peaceful and they were walking and saying, okay, here, and they were marching and making their statements. And these people were going in and vandalizing subway stations, and they were doing a lot of things of that nature. And I think that when some of those occurred, there was, people were saying, okay, that, they're doing this so that there's change. The challenge was it almost went to the point where people said, well, wait a second, people also have to get on, it definitely, it damaged the economy in many ways. And it was like people want to get on with their lives. So it's like there should be more of a dialogue around it. And so I think that it was definitely has been a challenging time for Hong Kong. Hong Kong, of course, is very resilient. And so over time, I think that it will, it'll definitely recover. And then, of course, the virus came, which was not good. But, clearly there are, as with every country, there's always things that people want to see changed. And here, one of the big challenges has been the high cost of property, high cost of living. It's the most expensive city to live in the world. And so people were looking for, okay, really, how do we have that? How do you have that, continue to improve it? And how do you have that dialogue, which is ultimately what you want in these situations?
So from a leadership standpoint, I guess a lot of us that were sitting on the outside looking in, with respect to COVID-19 and to the protest, Black Lives Matter, or as what some people would call dissidents who are fighting the power structure of China. How did, and I think there's a mayor. Is that what you all have there?
So there's a chief executive. Yeah. And so what happened is the chief executive, it's the way it's set up. It's unique. They've set it up in a very unique way because it's, and it's with all these things. If you look at how it was run before, where you had a governor, and the governor worked very closely. It was interesting. It was the system they had was very much a blend of East and West. And so what they would do is there's about 1,000 different listening points in terms of how it was run. And it was very much run on a consensus basis. And that's what's unique. It's very much a free market in many ways. And I think, as you see with a number of free markets, they can get challenging because you want to have, so for example, there's not necessarily there is free medical care, but there isn't a huge social welfare system. People work and what have you. But as it has transitioned from the handover, there was a shift in the sense that, if you look at how it continued to change, I think there was a desire to have more dialogue in the political process, which wasn't there before. That's what's interesting. It wasn't there before. And so that's been, they've been putting that pressure. Now it continues to be a place where, despite some of the recent challenges, there still is dialogue. We're still reading about, you can still read what's happening in the press and what have you. But ultimately, this is really a place where there's, business gets done, people get on with their lives, and we'll see what happens with the recent, what's been passed. Now, it's interesting from if you think about it, any of the discussion around, okay, we want independence. I mean, this is part of China. It's been part of China it's literally part of China. And so therefore it's, from an independent perspective, that's, that's not going to happen. It is part of China.
You're saying, yes.
Yeah, it's far-reaching. It's like all of a sudden Texas says, "Okay, we're no longer part of the U.S." Well, no.
Did you just offer Texas
you're
up?
part of the United States? No, God, no.
Oh, God.
No, but you know what I mean.
I thought I heard you say, "Hey, Texas,
or different states." So it'd be, or
you.
in all those. But no, so it's it's one of those things. And when you look at, I think with a number of things, it's. I think people always saw Hong Kong in some ways maybe a different way or a different light, and so we'll see. This is a place where, as I said, people want to get it. It plays an very important role for China, and it plays a very important role for China and the region. And I think it will continue to do that. But what they want to see here is they want to see this place work, and for literally 9 months, it wasn't working. Despite yes, there was dialogue, but it wasn't working in the way that it needed to, in the sense that. Let's allow people to go on and have the economy grow. For 9 months, there was literally protests, which was challenging. There's no question. Disruptive.
So from a business perspective, and I was following this past 9, 10, 12 months, from a business perspective, if I'm an American and I'm looking at trying to, I need to talk to Asia Sports Tech, number one, I'm sure. But also,
you did.
I'm looking at and getting into the markets over there, but
yes.
I'm just not sure how I'll be treated, or if my business is my own when I get there, or is it a part of what some may think is the Chinese government? I mean, how do you allow those fears?
So I think ultimately,
business?
I mean, I think that there's clearly there's a fair bit of tension that's happened, between China and the U.S. No question there. We'll have to see if that does change. Let's say if there is an election, maybe that changes, but. Ultimately, again, this is a place where they want this place to be a business hub. It does play a critical role for China. It plays a critical role for a number of countries in the region, and so we'll see. But certainly, the thing that Hong Kong has always had for it is rule of law. So it has continued. It has, it's a free market, low tax rate, all those different things, free port, and I think that will continue. Now, given, we'll have to see what the new status that is the U.S. has now said is just like another city in China, but we'll see. We'll see how that impacts it. As with many of these things, it's often okay. There's concern or there's fear, but ultimately, what will happen it is the key. Like, how will that law be applied and things of that nature.
Well, one thing I want to do before we get out of here, I want to really kind of wrap this thing around the sports piece.
Sure.
There is absolutely no doubt that there are fine athletes that have come out of Asia. I mean, in every particular sports.
Yep.
I'm not going to admit that some are even leading. I'm not going to admit that. But now they've loaned a few to the world. But in terms of the NBA and them getting ready to recalibrate and gonna start the season, we were talking a little bit offline. You said soccer started already in Asia. Baseball's already kicked off. So kind of tell us a little bit about that, how that looks for you all. Are there fans in the stadiums or not?
In some, yes. So again, and this is, I think if you look around, around the world of sports, different countries have opened in different ways, and you have to, there's been a different, almost like a different approach to how they've opened. So, for example, in Taiwan opened in April, both baseball and the baseball league and their soccer league, and they actually have had some fans go back by this point. Then in May, you had Korea, both baseball and soccer. Then in June, you've had the Chinese Basketball Association, and you've had Japanese baseball, and then soon will be Japanese soccer, the J League. So those have all happened, but one of the reasons why that's happened, again, ties into the mask. And, wearing of the mask and lowering the curve and getting literally the infection rate really, really low. And that's kind of been the approach. Very strict protocols. I think all leagues around the world, also the ones in Europe, in terms of a lot of the soccer leagues or football leagues, as they call it, those have had really strict reopening protocols. But I think ultimately what this has highlighted is the importance of doctors and the whole medical profession, and the importance of what they're saying, and of course the safety of both the players, but as well the players and all the teams and all the officials that work with those teams, right? So that part's important. Clearly, if you look at where some of these leagues are playing, Asia, the one way to look at Asia is a lot of city states, so main centers. So in Taiwan, it's Taipei. In Korea, they can play a fair bit of games, or a number of teams are in Seoul. In Japan, there's there's probably there's maybe fewer locations where they're playing in some instances, and so they've kind of done a little bit and they're smaller geographically. You can it's keeping all the players kind of in a bubble as well, same type of thing. And so, but if you really look at it, in all cases, they had really flattened the curve. The infection rate had gone down. And so it was just easier to do that, where you weren't finding players or staff on these teams that were infected. Part of the challenge as the leagues are starting up in North America is that they're finding a fair number of people have it, even if they're not showing symptoms. So I think it's smart what the NBA is doing in terms of having it in one location. I know, for example, the NHL is doing it in two locations. One conference, the West is going to Edmonton, the East is going to Toronto. Football, I think they're still looking to plan, but they're going to have a lot of things in place. And then baseball, they've agreed, but it's just how do they start that up? So, but it's so much. I believe it's so much dependent on the mask and isolating. It really is. It's key.
Well, Loron, one thing I'll say about here in America and those leagues starting up, I know baseball, MLB was talking about Arizona, but you're talking about a state whose numbers are out of the roof. Yeah. And then, of course, you got the NBA that's in Florida. The numbers are out of the roof. And so this protective bubble, and then you got some of those players who want to go out and get their own food, right? They don't want to just use the local whatever. And then they are bringing possibly something back into that bubble. And now you don't have protections anymore.
Yeah, this is, again, I think one of the, and I've talked about this with, friends in both Canada and the US. It's very much, it's a different approach, right? Where it's here, it's kind of like, no, we're doing this. Again, a lot of these cultures are very much where it's homogenous. They say, okay, yes, we're doing, the whole mask thing, right? I'm wearing this so I protect you from me, right? So it's a different thing. And, even if you look at where they fund it, it's about, I'm worried about you. It's not like, and I've seen in some of the interviews, there's so many people saying, you should wear masks, and someone says, hey, don't tell me what to do. I can do what I want or have my rights. Well, you know what? These are everybody's rights. And since you want everybody to be safe and doing well. And so that's a key part to it. So, ultimately, like, think about it. So let's say the example you just gave, let's say players say, I want to go out and they come back and everyone else gets sick. Well, that could jeopardize the rest of the season, or that could jeopardize their team. So I think obviously everyone is going to want to do as much as they can and do their part to in all the leagues that have started up. They want to do their part to make sure that their leagues can continue, because the piece that we haven't really talked about is that all of these leagues have obligations, have television and game obligations to the people that are helping to fund their leagues and ultimately to pay the players and the staff. And so they need to finish these seasons. If you think of, I know in the case of the Premier League, in the league in England, the soccer league, football league, the reason why they played is because they had already been paid for the rest of the season. And so therefore they had to finish out the season, or they had to give the money back. And so
no mas.
No mas. You gotta, no more. And so, and so, I think that, if you look at what's happened with all of this, you've seen some creative solutions to bridge into the seasons. Think of what, if you think of the likes of what ESPN did, some of the series they showed, you saw esports, which of course, out of this, it's interesting what we've seen here in Asia. And I think you're seeing in different parts of the world, we've seen a couple of really big trends. One, leagues have been creative, which is, interesting, like creative. They've had to adopt esports. You're seeing this huge increase in home health and wellness and fitness. We actually work in a number of areas there. We help actually organizations innovate, and how do they have digital transformation? That's really key. Esports has gone through the roof, and there's a lot with that. And we think development certainly here, because actually Asia's done very well with a number of things like League of Legends, some of these other key types of esports. And then I think you're also seeing something where governments are going to play a large role in terms of having their populations be healthier, because the cost, certainly out here, again, it's generally public health care. They don't want to, they want the population to stay very healthy. And so they are doing whatever they can to keep people active and moving. And then the other part that I think is going to be interesting is what we've seen already where they have opened it up. So for example, New Zealand, which literally has no cases, they've reopened their rugby season, and they're seeing teams that might get 10 or 15,000. They're seeing these people getting 40,000 fans. So what that says to me is people are dying to go back and see sports. Yeah. And whether it's right now watching it with no fans, but having either fan noise or even simulated noise, that's all right. Like, sports is here. People love it. It's such a part of our lives, right? And it's no different here in Asia. I mean, people here are watching all the games that are taking, all the different, we're lucky because we get to see everything here from all around the world, and follow it. Many people do, but just that passion for sports is there. So, with key themes are digitization of all. We're seeing a real, health and wellness and fitness has become really important. We're seeing stuff in esports. And I think ultimately we're going to see it's going to be a very, a lot of people have missed it, and you're going to see a real, people realize how much they miss it, and how great will it be when we actually get to go back into stadiums and watch these events? I mean, they always say, it's not until you don't have it till you really, really miss it. That's right. The world misses sports, and frankly, with all the challenges taking place these days, we need sports to bring everyone together. I mean, ultimately, how amazing it would be, and we'll still see is. Can you imagine how incredible it'll be at the 2020 Olympics taking place in 2021 in Tokyo? If we can get there and they can happen, it'd be an incredible moment. Well, and a great moment for the world, a great sporting event and celebration if we can just get there. And the way we're going to get there, wearing masks, social distancing, washing hands, and looking after each other.
Well, Loron, I'll tell you this. One thing that I think in America and in the U.S. that we have really enjoyed is our great liberties, right? And so typically as Americans, we are free to do this. So we've always talked about these freedoms. Mm-hmm. And then when somebody says, I know you have the freedom to do this, but if you do it, there's a possibility there is a negative side to that. And when you say, look, if you'll wear a mask, we can be back to the arenas. We can be back in school. We can be back at these careers that we're doing if we can help flatten this curve. And I think what folks have done in Asia is they've listened to that oneness where those of us here who live in the freest country in the world, we say, right? Mm-hmm. We're not listening. And so, hey, maybe we'll grow up one day. Maybe we'll grow up one day, man.
Well, I think what'll happen is you'll see states that are doing that and you just see the curve flatten, and it literally shows. Now like I said, we've just had our third wave, right? So it just came back. So we had and again, this is, in fairness, this is an area of 7.5 million people. Yes. So it's smaller than several of the largest cities in the US, right? And so we had it where we had something it was several weeks where there were no new local infections, meaning no infections from here. The only ones were people that had come in and they were getting tested. Oh, by the way, the testing, fair bit of testing. We could have more. When you come into the airport, they test you. You stay in the airport or you stay at the hotel beside the airport it can be up to, anywhere from 8 to 14 hours till the test results come back. You're not released or going anywhere until they determine whether you are infected or not infected. If you're infected, quarantine, and you go to a location and they quarantine you. In Thailand, everybody that comes back gets put up in hotels paid for by the government to make sure that they don't spread it. So it's really stringent. Two other things I haven't told you. Everywhere we go, if you go into a restaurant that still has social distancing, I get my temperature taken probably 10 to 12 times a day. Yes, everywhere you go, you get your temperature taken. They just, on this round, you can get fined about $700 if you don't wear a mask in a taxi or on a subway. So they're actually passing laws to say you must do this because they want to just get this. They want to suppress it. They don't want any new cases. You can't imagine how different, we were doing so well and people relaxed a little bit. You can't imagine but how quickly people immediately said, okay, we're doing this. And for example, a number of companies just said, okay, everybody go work from home, no problem.
Yeah.
So it's, this is, we haven't had many situations like that in the world. And this one is, obviously the last big one was, back in the 1920s, around then, or late 1918, what have you. And, this is, it's really tested the political systems. It's really tested the medical systems and the medical workers. I mean, they are, if you watch the news and you see that they are, to me, it's unbelievable how little coverage and attention and gratitude for these guys. I mean, these people are putting their lives on the line, and people are dying. There are medical staff that are catching this and dying. Right. It's happened, right? That's right. And they're doing this, and in a way, by not listening to the advice of them, and to Dr. Fauci and all this stuff, by not listening to them, you're actually jeopardizing the medical workers as well. That to me is selfish. Right. I know people have rights, but that is selfish. And so, it's very much, we need people to pull together at this time globally. All these countries, we just need to. It's, it's that serious.
I like the way you said that. We need people to pull together.
Yes.
Globally.
Yes.
Because when we figure this thing out, that we are just one people. I think when all of us wiped out, I don't know if the good guy upstairs is going to replace all of us with a whole new set of folks that are already grown, but I don't think it's going to happen like that. We need to watch out for one another, right?
We really do. And it's the only way that we will get back to a closer version of normal. It still will take time, because ultimately, it'll take time. Yes, and maybe there is a vaccine or what have you. Again, we still don't know if how that will. It may not be a vaccine that 100% cures someone, but it maybe gives a certain amount of protection or immunity, right? I mean, some level of protection. But though, we don't know that. So the best thing we can do is just really reduce the instances of this around the world so that we can get back to normal. And then, equally, like, for example, in our case, we've actually been very busy. Our business has accelerated in terms of different people wanting to work in these things. I've also seen, people have adapted. They've said, okay, how do we do homeschooling? How do we, I had one friend who said, we were doing the Zoom classes with our kids. It wasn't, just wasn't working for their child. And so they said, how lucky, and again, it's tough, but how lucky are we to be able to spend our time with their children, right? They're to be able to spend their time. And they said, here's what my son learned. This is a friend of mine who works for Nike up in China. He said, this is what my son has learned in the last month. And he did his own, like he said, I want to learn about these things. He did. He's like, younger. He's, I think 6 or 7. So he had this whole list of things he learned, and then as well, new skills. And he said he can dribble with the basketball because his father's a basketball player, and great guy. He played in the pro league here in Hong Kong. So he said, my son now can dribble with both hands. Like, he had all these lists of things that he could do. So creativity, creativity, learning, but it's, think of I don't get me wrong. I know that for a number of parents, it's been challenging because they've had to worry. I've one friend, he's continuing to do his full-time job. He says he's become a computer technician for his kids. And equally, he's got there's about 9, he's got, I think his parents are in the house, and he's got 4 kids and his wife, 4 kids, his wife. So he's got 6 people in the house, 6 or 7. Yeah. So, sorry, I got that wrong. He's got 8 people in the house. And so he's doing this, plus he's doing his job. And so obviously there are challenging moments, but at the same time, this is when everybody gets, they're spending time together. So what choice do you have but to make the most of it, right? And learn from it. I don't know. It's just, we'll get through it. I think we'll get through this, but we have to literally look after each other.
I think we'll end it right there. I think what you just said was we need to look after each other. I mean, we need to look after each other. Hey, Loron, I appreciate you stopping by the Funky Politics studio.
Yes.
And man, it's been fun. Look, I know you had to stay up for us, and I want folks to know.
No problem.
You're 12 hours light away from us right now, and I can tell you. It's dark outside, probably where you're at right now.
Oh, it's definitely, it's dark. It's like, what time? Let me look at the time. Oh, yeah, it's 12:41 in the morning, but believe me, it's been great being on here, DC, and say hello to my friend Larry. He's great. Always always great. So,
I'll tell Larry you said
yeah,
that. I'm pretty sure
of
he's watching
course.
this somewhere, man. Hey, be good, but thanks a lot
hope
for stopping by, and I'll be back with some
so.
closing
Yeah,
thoughts.
he's great.
He's a
No,
good guy.
he's great. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Thank you.
Welcome to the Grind Set Show. We are so excited to have Felicia Jarrell in the studio with us today. She is the CEO of Gold Mine and Cocoa. First of all, Felicia, what is Gold Mine and Cocoa and how did it get started?
Gold Mine and Cocoa is an online stationery and lifestyle brand where we sprinkle planners, accessories, and apparel with Black girl magic so you can make a powerful statement and plan for success. So our merchandise features hand-drawn depictions of everyday Black women and delivers the sentiment of sisterhood and positive vibes you need to achieve your life and business goals.
Kadzukian. Check out all your Kadzukian favorites now. Download the Kadzukian app, available on Android and iOS.
Hey, let me tell you, Loron Orris, man, is a treasure. Just to be able to have him on the show, this guy has been around, man. He's done the NBA, he's done Amex, he's been everything that a lot of us are still. I don't want to be a hooper, but anyway, he knows the hoop stars, right? But he's in Hong Kong, and I think it's interesting to have on the show a different perspective. We've heard a lot about what's happening in Florida, what's happening in Texas, what's happening in Tennessee, what's happening in Georgia, but to hear some things on the ground in Hong Kong. A culture that's probably not a lot like ours here in America, but that they are still going through some of the same things we are, but they're flattening the curve. They're also being able to catch up on a little bit of sports as well, too. So one of these days, hopefully real soon, we'll be able to do the same thing, but we won't be able to get there. And I think one of the things I heard Lauren say was that they have taken to wearing these masks. And so we need to get used to wearing the mask. We need to get used to washing these hands constantly, and we need to get used to socially distancing ourselves from others. If we do that, I think we'll be around just a little bit longer. I need you guys around because I need somebody to talk to and see every once in a while. Hey, I'm DC, and it's been a pleasure today here on Funky Politics. I'll see you again the very next time.